So, you guys excited to be here? Yes. All right. We're going to have some fun. We're going to go really slow, and whatever we get through today, we get through. Whatever we don't, that's fine. We'll just move it on to the next week. So we want to make sure you guys absorb everything. Okay. Hey, Cindy, can we go to the first slide? Okay. So what you have in front of you is my notes. And you can use these. So there's two sets of notes. Okay. There's the main part called the cosmological argument. And then there's another set of notes that is more detailed. Some of the stuff we'll be learning. But for now, you can follow me along on the main page, the cosmological argument. Before we get really into it, I want to set up everything here. And we're going to play a short video as well. But first, I want to just cover real quickly what we covered this weekend, real quickly, because when you watch the video, it kind of matters if you understand this, okay? So do you guys remember this weekend when we covered, when we covered the arguments and how they can be valid, invalid, stuff like that? Okay. Well, this argument is a really common argument for God's existence, the cosmological argument, okay? Cosmos obviously means universe. So we're reasoning to God from the universe. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, the formal version of this argument was made popular by this man, William Lane Craig. And he's the one that put this video together. So, Cindy, let's play that video and let's pay attention.
Does God exist? Or is the material universe all that is, or ever was, or ever will be? One approach to answering this question is the cosmological argument. It goes like this: whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore, the universe has a cause. Is the first premise true? Let's consider. Believing that something can pop into existence without a cause is more of a stretch than believing in magic. At least with magic, you've got a hat and a magician. And if something can come into being from nothing, then why don't we see this happening all the time? No, everyday experience and scientific evidence confirm our first premise. If something begins to exist, it must have a cause. But what about our second premise? Did the universe begin, or has it always existed? Atheists have typically said that the universe has been here forever. The universe is just there, and that's all. First, let's consider the second law of thermodynamics. It tells us the universe is slowly running out of usable energy, and that's the point. If the universe had been here forever, it would have run out of usable energy by now. The second law points us to a universe that has a definite beginning. This is further confirmed by a series of remarkable scientific discoveries. In 1915, Albert Einstein presented his general theory of relativity. This allowed us, for the first time, to talk meaningfully about the past history of the universe. Next, Alexander Friedmann and George Lemaitre, each working with Einstein's equations, predicted that the universe is expanding. Then in 1929, Edwin Hubble measured the red shift in light from distant galaxies. This empirical evidence confirmed not only that the universe is expanding, but that it sprang into being from a single point in the finite past. It was a monumental discovery, almost beyond comprehension. However, not everyone is fond of a finite universe, so it wasn't long before alternative models popped into existence. But one by one, these models failed to stand the test of time. More recently, 3 leading cosmologists, Arvin Bord, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin, prove that any universe which has on average been expanding throughout its history cannot be eternal in the past, but must have an absolute beginning. This even applies to the multiverse, if there is such a thing. This means that scientists can no longer hide behind a past eternal universe. There is no escape. they have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Any adequate model must have a beginning, just like the standard model. It's quite plausible then that both premises of the argument are true. This means that the conclusion is also true. The universe has a cause. And since the universe can't cause itself, its cause must be beyond the space-time universe. It must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, uncaused, and unimaginably powerful, much like God. The cosmological argument shows that, in fact, it is quite reasonable to believe that God does exist.
All right, can you go to slide 3? Then you should be good from there. That kind of makes sense a little bit what they're saying. They're trying to use scientific evidence to show that the beginning or the universe had a beginning, and then they unpack what it means to have a beginning. Okay, so now again, we're going to go through this very slowly. Before we do, though, I want to remind us of what these arguments look like, because that was a structured argument. So, invalid argument, we talked about this weekend, right? There's two premises, the first two lines. Now, a premise is just a claim to truth. Like I claim this is what it is, right? So it's just a statement, basically. So the first one is, if it rains, the grass gets wet. You have to figure out, is that true? Okay, it seems like it's true. The grass is wet, so let's say at this point in time, the grass is wet. Therefore, it must have rained. Now, that's an invalid argument, correct? And you understand why? Right? Because the conclusion doesn't necessarily follow from the premises, right? Okay, that's an invalid argument. Any questions you have at any time, you raise your hand, okay? A valid argument, again, is these two premises. Elephants have 4 legs. Rob Skudovic is an elephant, therefore Rob Skudovic has 4 legs. Now, the difference between this one and the last one is that the conclusion does follow if the premises are true. So if Rob was an elephant, let's say, then it would follow that he has 4 legs. But we know that Rob Skudovic is a person. Therefore, it's technically valid because the conclusion follows, but it's not sound. It's not good. You would never use an argument like this to prove anything. Does that make sense? So not only do you have to have true premises, but the conclusion has to follow. And so lastly, a sound argument. All men are mortal, right? Physically, we will all die. Socrates is a man or was a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Both premises are true, and the conclusion follows. Any questions so far? No? All right, we play the video. And here's the argument. So again, it's in your notes. Premise 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. We're going to run through that. We're going to run through each one of these. Yep. So whatever did not exist before but exists now needs to have a reason why it exists. So let's say this stool right here. This stool exists now. Okay. Let's say it was built 10 years ago. So 20 years ago, this stool did not exist, correct? If it was built 10 years ago, let's say. That means that this stool has a cause or has a reason why it exists. And that might be because somebody grabbed some wood and nails and put it together. That's the cause, right? Right? It's just basically whatever exists now that did not exist before must have a reason why it exists all of a sudden. It can't just come into being with no reason at all.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. So, oh, by the way, from now on, could you guys use the microphones because this is being recorded and they won't hear you. So, we'll just put those on. Yes, it means initiating something, right? So, like the video said, there's effects, right? So, an effect might be it's bright up here on stage. Well, there's a cause to that because there's lights up here shining on the stage, right? So, yes, that's what a cause is a reason why something is, right? Okay, does that make sense? Okay. So, whatever begins to exist, or like I said, Anything that didn't exist before now exists, right? Whatever begins to exist must have a cause or a reason why it exists. The universe began to exist, meaning at one point in time or one point, there was no universe. There was nothing, okay? And we're going to delve into what that means more specifically. And then you get to this conclusion of therefore the universe has a cause. And some of you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, that conclusion seems so obvious. Why are we running through this whole argument, right? I mean, I would say most people, if you talk to them on the streets, they'd say, if you said, does the universe have a cause? They'd say, yeah, of course. But the reason why we run through this is because people do object to the premise 1 and premise 2. And we want to be equipped to answer that, okay? Some people will say that, no, you don't need a cause for anything to begin to exist. Or they'll say, they might believe that, no, the universe has always been here, right? So that's why we go through the whole argument. One tip of advice before I move on. We're learning this. Why? We're learning this so that if we need it, if we have a conversation, we're trying to lead someone to Christ, and one of their big hurdles is, I want to believe in God, I just don't see any evidence. Now you go, oh, here's an opportunity. I can start sharing a little bit of evidence with them, right? But here's my advice. Don't pretend to know more than you do. Only, if you're in a conversation and you're trying to explain to them and they have a question that you don't know how to answer, that's okay. Tell them, actually, I don't know the answer to that. Your honesty will be very powerful. And because people like it when you're authentic. I actually had this happen to me recently where somebody asked me a really hard question. I said, I don't know the answer. And he said, really? Because a lot of Christians will pretend to know an answer. And it always bothers me. I said, well, if you don't know an answer, that's okay. Admit it. So this is not about getting everything perfect. All right. So don't think it is. So let's dive into the first premise. Let's try to unpack this and understand it. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Now, how do we know this? How do we know this? How can we show this to be true? Well, have any of you here ever witnessed anything come into being without a cause? Okay, so that's one explanation. So you might tell the person, well, have you ever experienced something coming into being with no cause? If they say yes, they have a big burden of proof, right? They're going to have to show how that could be possible. So when we talk about coming into being, right? When we talk about what does that mean to come into being? Well, there's actually two things we can talk about. And one is called creatio ex nihilo. Does anybody know what this means? All right, I'll explain it. I think it's Latin or something. It means creation out of nothing. Okay, so if somebody talks about creatio ex nihilo, it stands for creation out of nothing. Because there is a difference between creating something from nothing and creating something like this stool from existing wood, right? Okay. Creation from nothing is what we imagine God did, right? Because there was nothing, and then he spoke, and everything began to exist, right? So that would be creatio ex nihilo, creation from nothing. When we make things, it's not that, right? It's creation or putting together things that already exist. But still, like I said, it doesn't matter because this stool didn't always exist. Somebody made it, right? So it has a cause. Okay. Creatio ex nihilo. What is it again? Creation out of nothing. Okay. And here's a more formal definition, and it's on your notes on the back side of the first page. Number 3, if you look towards the top, it says it's a theological doctrine, and it states that God created the universe from absolute nothingness, not from pre-existing material or chaos, but emphasizing God's absolute power and transcendence as the sole source of all existence. That's at the top of the back of the first page. I think it's on that one. Here's it. You find it? Oh, and maybe it's different on mine. Oh, there it is on the first page. Sorry. It's on the second page on mine. So it's on the first page on yours. So now, when we talk about creation out of nothing, what is nothing? What is nothing? Can anybody define nothing? Yeah, go ahead and speak into that.
I like to say that nothing is more than just emptiness with the absence of light, because that's like the most I can even comprehend.
Anybody else want to take a stab what you think nothing is or how you define it? I like what Aristotle said about nothing. He said this: nothing is what rocks dream about. Right? Because rocks can't dream, there's nothing there. Sometimes I try to imagine nothing. And what do I imagine? I imagine like a dark everything around me, right? There's no things. But it's hard because even in imagining that, my mind is in that scenario. And so therefore there's not nothing. I'm still there. So it's really hard to describe it. So I like that. Aristotle said nothing is what rocks dream about. That's what we mean by nothing. Now, the reason why it's important to know that is because somebody might say, well, there was nothing and then there was something. But what they really mean is that it wasn't really nothing. It was something. It was just kind of like mysterious, That's not what we're saying. We're saying there was no thing, like you said. Okay? So we don't just mean, when we talk about this the first premise, we don't just mean creatio ex nihilo, although we do. We also mean anything that comes into existence that didn't exist before, whether it's out of nothing or out of something, okay? At one point in time, you guys did not exist, correct? Therefore, you have a cause of why you're here, right? You think it's working?
Please. So I got a question thrown at me this week. If there was nothing, then how did water get separated from the heavens above to the heavens below? I'm like, that is completely over my head. Obviously, there was nothing, but then God would have had to create water. Or he would have. How can you argue against some kind of thing there? Earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. I can't argue that there was water.
All right. Say that one more time, Cindy. Sorry.
Okay, the argument is there had to be something because God couldn't separate the waters if there wasn't water there to begin with. But I'm like, well, I know that it was formless and void, but then he must have created water.
Right. Well,
then separate the waters.
Is this a Christian asking or is this a non? Okay.
So
Christian. That's important to know. Are they Christian or not? Because then you can kind of tell where they're coming from. So I'm assuming what they're trying to understand this, but they're actually already ahead of the game. Like at that point, there's already something. We're talking about even before that, where there was no thing and then God created. And then after that, he can do whatever he wants with creation, right? Separate the waters and the sky, right? So anyways, we're talking about anything that comes into existence, like animals, people, chairs or stools or cars, anything that at one point did not exist and now exists must have a cause. So I want to really ingrain that in you. First point is that our everyday experience confirms this. Like we just talked about a few minutes ago. Have you ever seen anything come into existence without a cause? No. Anything you see in this room, anything, has a cause of why it exists. There's a reason why it exists. Somebody made it, or it grew from the ground, or whatever it might be. It has a reason why it exists. Okay. Also, the video talked about how it's worse than magic. The reason why it says that is because at least with magic, you have something that starts with, right? When you have a rabbit pulled out of a hat, let's say, at least you have a magician there. At least you have a hat. But we're talking about before there was anything, right? So there was no thing. So to believe that something could come into being or pop into being with no cause is worse than magic. That's why it says that. And then lastly, Why wouldn't we see this happen all the time? Let's say that things could come into being from nothing, by nothing, with no cause. Then why don't we see it all the time? Why don't we see all these things just pop into being all the time? We don't, for good reason, because they need a cause. Okay, so it seems at least to me, it seems very logical. It seems very common sense, but not for everybody. It's not. Okay. And this is part of it, is being patient with people, right? You might get frustrated. Like, how do you not understand this? But people think differently. And so you kind of got to walk through these things with them sometimes. All right. So we've never seen anything come into being without a cause, right? Good. Well, the next thing would be one objection that people might bring up. Okay, Jesse, but what about God? Like, God exists. So what's his cause? And then what's the cause of that? And then what's the cause of that, right? Have you ever heard this? What would be an answer you might give? Anybody want to try? Yeah.
I know this because I've done this before. So, God doesn't have a beginning and he'll never have an ending. He has always existed. So he's outside of the process of making things begin.
Yes, Hannah. Do you want to give Hannah the mic? Because this is all being recorded, so otherwise they won't hear you online.
So if God created space and time, and he created it in a time frame, he has to exist outside of the bubble of space and time.
Correct.
Because you can't create something that you're already in. You have to be kind of outside of it. If you go to build a chair, you can't only be sitting in the chair. You got to be outside of it.
Right. Well, and that's true. That's true. The question is, though, what if somebody says, yeah, but doesn't God need a cause? And the answer is no, but the question is why? Want to take a stab at it? You want to turn that mic on there? There you go.
Well, he doesn't need a cause because he's always been. He has no beginning. Therefore, he has no end.
Very good. So when we look back at the first premise, what was the first premise again? Whatever begins to exist has a cause. It doesn't apply to God because he never began to exist. It only applies to things that begin to exist. That's why it doesn't apply to God. At the end of the day, and this is can get pretty deep philosophically, but at the end of the day, there has to be an uncaused first cause. There has to be something, the buck has to stop somewhere. There has to be something that is uncaused that caused everything. Otherwise, you get problems with an infinite regress, which we'll get into later. But yes, God did not have a beginning. Therefore, God does not need a cause. Make sense so far? Okay. Questions anytime, you guys.
How do you convince somebody of that house?
So you said, how do you convince somebody that God has always existed? Right.
I mean, other than
Right. So you can do it kind of how I was just talking about philosophically. So I would say this, talking to someone who doesn't believe in God, and you say, well, God exists. So let's just say this. Let's not use the word God. Let's say, I believe there is a being that has always existed that created everything. Well, why do you believe that? Okay, well, here's why. Because if there was not an uncaused first cause, so like the beginning of everything, then there would be an infinite amount of causes. Oh, well, what caused God? What caused that God? What caused that thing? And the problem with an infinite regress, which we'll get into, is that you cannot traverse an infinite. So in other words, if there was an infinite amount of causes in the past, today would have never gotten here. Kind of makes sense. We'll get into that a little bit deeper. But basically, you need something as a first cause that wasn't caused. Otherwise, there'd be no thing. There's a quote, I can't remember who said it, but he said this: if anything exists at all, then something has to have always existed. Let me say it again. If anything exists, one thing, even anything, then something has to have always existed. Why? Because if there was ever a point in time where nothing existed, or ever a point in reality where nothing existed, then nothing would exist now. There would be no thing here now. So it can get pretty deep, but that's kind of how I would go about it, is that philosophical way of reasoning. You have to have, the buck has to stop somewhere, otherwise there'd be no thing here now today. And I know it's deep, but hopefully as we get through this, it'll make more sense. So we went through the first premise: whatever begins to exist has a cause. And we've shown that, according to our personal experience, we see that to be true. So your whole goal in this part is to convince the person that that premise is true, or more plausibly true than not. So like, even if they're like, yeah, it might be possible for something to come into being, but it's not plausible. Like, you're just trying to convince them, like, okay, that makes sense. Let's move down the line. Okay. Second premise: the universe began to exist. This one we're going to go deep into, guys. So I'm going to take my time again. I don't know, how long this is going to take, but this one is the one where we got a lot of explaining to do. All right. Now, I don't want you guys to get upset unnecessarily, but I'm going to be talking about the Big Bang Theory, because I think it shows something that we miss sometimes. Now, the Big Bang Theory simply is this: it is a theory of the universe. It is a theory that tries to explain why time, space, and matter exists. Okay. And you might be saying, well, Jesse, we don't believe in the Big Bang. We're Christians. I like what Frank Turk said. He's the one that wrote this book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. He says this. He says, I believe in the Big Bang. I think there's good evidence for it. I just know who banged it. Right? So he comes from this point of view, which I agree with. I think there's good evidence for the Big Bang, that the universe, time, space, and matter had a beginning at this point where everything came into existence. And the best explanation we'll see is that God must have done something like that. Right? When I imagine creation, I mean, I don't know what it was like. None of us were there, right? But I could certainly see God speaking and everything comes into being. Yes, go ahead and grab a mic from somebody.
A fun fact that I've always enjoyed to bring up is that the word universe means one verse, which is a single spoken phrase.
Okay, I like that. Thank you. Yeah, so don't be intimidated by this. This is simply a theory that has some good evidence for it. And actually, I'll tell you what, it doesn't hurt our case as Christians. It actually helps it. Okay, because for a long time, before this theory was postulated, scientists would say, well, the universe is eternal. It's always existed. That is the prime reality. That is the uncaused first cause, the universe itself. But then they realized just in the last century, no, it actually has a beginning, which really helps our case. And I'll get to that. I'll get to why here in a second. Typically, many believe the universe was eternal, and therefore it didn't need a cause, right? Remember we said earlier, the first premise doesn't apply to God? Well, back then they'd say, well, the first premise doesn't apply because the universe is eternal. So now we got to show why it's not, right? We got to show why the universe is finite. Okay. Now, again, remember I said, does this line up with Scripture? Actually, it does really well. And here's the thing. Theologians, Christians have been saying this for thousands of years, that the universe had a beginning. We've been saying that forever because the Bible talks about it, right? But scientists haven't, so they're just catching up to us. And it lines up with Scripture. So Big Bang cosmology. In the beginning, we go look at the first verse of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, I like putting it this way. In the beginning, so now you have the beginning of time. God created the heavens, which is basically, they didn't have a word for universe in that language. So heavens meaning sky, the universe, everything above us, and the earth or matter. So I like to put it this way: God created time, space, and matter. Okay? It fits very well. And it's in perfect alignment with Christian doctrine that time, space, and matter, God created. Okay? Make sense so far? Okay? So we don't need to be afraid of the Big Bang Theory. We just need to understand it. What's next? So, surge. So we have two ways that we go about defending this. We have scientific evidence, which is probably the most daunting. That's why the second packet I gave you is all the scientific evidence. It's not like super detailed, but it's enough. And then there's philosophical evidence. But we're going to go over the scientific evidence first, and we're going to try to get you guys to memorize it a little bit. But it comes in an acronym. Acronym is SURGE. This acronym, I believe, is found in Frank Turk's book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And these are 5 points that he makes that show the beginning of the universe to be true. Let's go through them. We have the S stands for the second law of thermodynamics. We'll go over what that means. Actually, of all these evidences, this is my favorite. At least it makes the most sense to me. Then we have universe expanding. We'll talk about what that means. Next, we have radiation afterglow. We'll talk about what that means, scientific jargon, great galaxy seeds, and then lastly, Einstein's theory of relativity. So, let's turn to our surge paper. Okay. What is the second law of thermodynamics? Well, I'll just cover briefly what the first law is. So the first law, it says here, you'll have it on your paper too. The conservation law states that the total energy of an isolated system is constant. And what it means is this. It means there's only so much movement in any place. And in other words, energy can't just like randomly come in here. It has to come from something. And matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed. Now, the second law is talking about, I have examples here. I'm just trying to think of the first one I want to talk about, is about how that energy moves. So, say I had a flashlight. I wish I would have brought one. Let's say I have a flashlight. You got one? Awesome. Say I have a flashlight here. Now, in this flashlight, this is what we call an isolated system, meaning that the light is only coming from the power of the batteries in here, right? There's not like a plug that's feeding it, right? How do you turn it on? Oh, like that. All right, let's say I leave that like there. Okay? No? Like this? I'll do it like this. There you go. Sorry. So, if I leave this on for 5 minutes, assuming the batteries are fresh, will that light still be on? Yeah, well, probably. I hope so. Might want to get a refund if not. There you go. If we leave this on for 5 weeks, will the light still be on? Why not? Batteries are dead. Why did the batteries die? Depleted its energy. So the batteries are giving energy to a little filament or whatever's in there, LED, I don't know. But that energy is being used as light and some heat. And eventually, the batteries will run out. The energy will run out, correct? So that's basically what the second law is that usable energy will run out. Another way to look at it is this. Let's say we took, 5 or 6 pots of boiling water, and we just set them in random places here in the church. Now those pots are hot, right? But with the temperature in the room, eventually they'll what? They'll cool down. Why? Right, but that's the second law working. That's usable energy kind of coming to an equilibrium, is what it is. Okay, so the hot molecules and the colder molecules outside are kind of converging, and the hot ones are slowing down, the cool ones are speeding up, and eventually they equalize, and you got equal temperatures. Okay, that's the second law. And so when we apply this to the universe, there's a specific amount of energy in the universe. Okay, there's a specific amount and no more. And that energy, just like this flashlight, I'll give it back to you, is running out. Okay. the energy in the universe is running out. And when I say energy, I mean stuff like light and heat. Okay, movement, right? Actually, that's what heat is. It's fast-moving molecules. And the second law states that that energy will come to an equilibrium eventually. Meaning that the heat, in the same way those pots of boiling water come to an equilibrium in this room, in the same way the universe and all the stars and all the heat will come to an equilibrium eventually, right? But the question is, if the universe is eternal, how come it hasn't come to equilibrium yet? That flashlight. If I had said that flashlight's been on for eternity, would you believe me? No, because you'd say, well, no, if it was, it would have died by now. In the same exact way, the universe would not, there'd be no heat, there'd be no light, there'd be no life if this universe was eternal. This is very powerful, guys, when you understand this law. This is a universal law here. It happens everywhere. Even if you have, somebody asked me this last time, well, what if you have because a star can give birth to new stars? And I said, okay, even I don't know much about it, but even if that's true, the total amount of energy is still going down. It's like if you have a fire pit, right? And then a spark of coal jumps and starts another fire. The total energy would still, it's gathering new fuel. Yes, that's fine. But if you have an isolated system, eventually, if there's nothing feeding it, the energy, eventually it will die. And this is what we call entropy, a fancy word, basically meaning running down or running out of. It's basically going from order to disorder. You guys ever, when I was a kid, we had these little things, you put color sand in them and you do it layer by layer by layer in these little plastic jars. And you could do cool stuff by making patterns, right? So I would, I'd fill it up with a red layer and a blue and a green and yellow. And, you get this little shape and it looks cool. And they're all ordered, right? That would be like a low state of entropy, meaning a low state of disorder. But if I shook it up, all those colors would mix, right? Now we have high entropy or high disorder. Okay. That's kind of what that means. And the definition is here for you too. Therefore, when we look at this law and we look at how it applies, the universe cannot be eternal. Anybody remember why? Okay, real quick. Because of this law, the universe can't be eternal into the past. Why? Anybody, can you tell me? Hasn't reached equilibrium. And what does that mean again? Can you explain it? You got it, though. That's right. Meaning it hasn't, the heat and the light hasn't completely equalized throughout the universe, right? And if it was eternal, right, if it was eternal, all the energy would have been gone by now. Now, this assumes an isolated system. So, like the universe is isolated, meaning that there's nothing feeding it energy, right? So, if you had that flashlight, right, the only way I could get more energy is either by putting in new batteries or putting up a power source to it, an external thing. But in an isolated system, the energy will run out. Okay. That's the first one. Again, I got a couple examples, the flashlight, the sand art, and then like hot metal, versus surrounding air. Does that make sense so far? And please, if it doesn't, it's okay. Just ask any question you want. Okay? Okay. That's the first piece of evidence. And it's my favorite. So, the next piece of evidence is the U, which stands for universe is expanding. So back in 1929, you guys know about the Hubble telescope a little bit. So Edwin Hubble, he's looking through this telescope. And what he sees when he's looking at the stars is he sees a red hue, like a red shift, they call it. Okay? And that told him something very important. What it told him is this. We know in science that if light is stretched, like however you want to put it, if it's stretched beyond really long wavelengths, it looks red. That's what like infrared light is. It's really stretched light. But if light is shrunk or compacted, it's more of a bluish hue. So what the red hue told him when he's looking out at the stars is that the stars must be moving away from him or the Earth. They're moving away so fast that it stretches the light, giving it a red hue. And when he looked anywhere in the sky he looked, there was this red shift. It wasn't white light, it was shifted red. And some parts were shifted more red than others, meaning they were even farther away. Okay? This was really big. This was really important because what it showed is that if you extrapolate time backwards, if it's moving outward, if you go backwards in time, it had to have gotten closer and closer. That kind of makes sense? Okay? So matter, time, space, and matter is all expanding, okay, in every direction. But if it's expanding, then at one point it had to have coalesced. So, again, 1929, he's looking up in his telescope. He sees this red shift. He says, oh, this shows the stars are moving away. Therefore, the universe had to have some kind of beginning point, okay? If the stars were all white and not shifted, they're static, let's say, then you can't draw that conclusion the same way, okay? All right, so that is universe expanding was discovered in 1929. The third line of evidence scientifically, and this is starting to get a little deep scientifically even for me, but I understand enough to explain it. And again, I want to preface this by saying you're not going to memorize all these things unless you really want to, but some of this will stick, and you have the notes if you want to go back and learn about it. But what is the radiation afterglow? Well, this was discovered in 1965, and there's a couple of guys, one named Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson. They won a Nobel Prize for this, believe it or not. They discovered remnant heat in the universe. And what does that mean? Well, let me try to give an example. Let's say you have a grenade go off somewhere. It goes off. There's a big fireball. And then 5 minutes later, you come back and you can kind of still feel the air's kind of warm. That's remnant heat from an explosion. Okay. Now the heat is a lot less hot than it was, right? But it's still lingering. In the same way, this is what they discovered. They discovered basically these are microwaves. This is heat that is, it's remnant, but it's not very hot, I should say. But they can see it. And this is kind of what it would look like. The red spots are more hot, yellow, orange, stuff like that. And it's funny because actually, you guys ever, like back, we had like older TVs and you'd flip between stations. If the station didn't have a connection to anything, it would be static. It would be, and you'd see the white snow. Part of that signal, not all of it, but part of it is detecting this afterglow. So you're actually seeing it on that TV screen. It is, like I said, it's like that explosion. It's leftover heat from what they would call the Big Bang, or the beginning of the universe. And this was discovered by what is it? I think it was not a satellite, but anyways, it was discovered in 1965. They won a Nobel Prize for it. And here's the point of this. If the universe was eternal, there wouldn't be this remnant heat left, going back to that second law. We see this remnant heat. If the universe had existed forever and it had blown up like this, the heat would all be dissipated by now. But it's not. It's still there, and we can still see it. Make sense? Any questions? No, this is just in space, in the universe, there's remnant heat. Okay? And the next one uses this one and goes a step further. Okay? The next one is great galaxy seeds. Now, what is this akin to? Well, remember I talked about that explosion, the grenade that went off, and it went off. 5 minutes later, you can still kind of feel the heat in the air, right? That's that remnant heat. What this would say is that that explosion wasn't random. That explosion was fixed. You guys know of like when they set up buildings for demolition, right? They put dynamite in very specific spots to get it to fall properly, right? That would be a controlled explosion, right? In the same way, the great galaxy seeds are kind of like that. It's kind of like the universe didn't just explode. It exploded or it came into being, I should say, exploded in a very fine-tuned way, to the point where these pockets of heat, if they weren't coming out exactly how they were coming out, there'd be no galaxies. And guess what? If there's no galaxies, there's no us, right? So there's no Earth or anything. So these great galaxy seeds, what they are, they're variations in the temperature of that radiation, of that heat background, okay? That allowed matter and gravity to form into galaxies and planets, and then eventually, our system and stuff like that. So the sign shows that that this Big Bang had fine-tuning involved in it, that it wasn't just random. This was 1989. This was discovered by the Kobe satellite. Okay, it detected these things, detected these slight variations that would allow galaxies to form. And these galaxy seeds are so precise, down to 1 part in 100,000. So they're basically, if you take the radiation afterglow, and you say, God, you fine-tuned it to these gray galaxy seeds. That's what that means. So like I said, it's like a controlled explosion, if that makes sense. Actually, it's funny. The guy who discovered this, George Smoot, he said this. He said, these appear to be machining marks from the creation of the universe and point to the fingerprints of a maker. Non-believing scientist in 1989. So it's pretty powerful stuff. No one talks about it, or not a lot, but it's powerful scientific evidence. Now, I want to say one quick thing. If you don't understand or don't agree with the scientific evidence, that's totally fine. That's totally fine. Then don't use it, right? Don't use things that you don't understand or don't agree with, obviously, okay? I'm just throwing out everything that I've learned, okay? So whatever sticks, sticks. All right. And the last piece of scientific evidence is Einstein's theory of general relativity. So what is this? Well, in 1915 to 1917, Einstein predicted that time, space, and matter are relative. In other words, you can't have one without the other. You can't have time and no space. You can't have material and no space. If they exist together. And so what Hubble was doing was more of a visual experimentation. What he was doing is more of a mathematical experimentation. But oddly enough, what he came up with matched what Edwin Hubble came up with. And so here's what it was. So his theory of general relativity showed, just by math, right? I can't wrap my head around it because I'm not that smart, but he showed just by math, that the universe had to have a beginning. Okay. But here's the thing. Before that happened, he made a boo-boo. It's called Einstein's fudge factor. And it's actually very interesting. So what happened is he most people would say he was a deist. Like, he wasn't necessarily Christian, but he kind of leaned towards God existing. But at one point in time, he wasn't. And when he wrote this equation out, he put a fudge factor in there. He put a variable in there that made the equation say something like the universe is eternal. But going back to Edwin Hubble invited Einstein to come look through his telescope. So Einstein went to the Hubble telescope. He looked through the Hubble telescope. He saw the redshift, and he went back and changed his equation. Some people believe that he did that on purpose to avoid the reality that the universe began to exist. I don't know that for sure, but he changed it, and he said later that it was the biggest blunder of his career. So Einstein with Evan Hubble showed that the universe had a beginning, along with these other proofs. That's kind of where I stop with the scientific stuff. There's probably more, but it's pretty well established, at least among mainstream science, that we know without a reasonable doubt, that the universe most certainly had a beginning, and we have scientific evidence. Here's the thing. I love the scientific evidence. That's not my go-to. This for me is like icing on the cake. I prefer the philosophical evidence. We'll get into that. Any questions before we move on? No? You guys are tracking with me. Awesome. Okay. So we got you some scientific evidence. Let's go to the philosophical evidence. Anybody know I guess what philosophy is? Could you define philosophy? Anybody? If you want to grab a mic. No? Okay, I'll explain it for you. Did you have something to say? Yeah, no, that's fine. So scientific, let's talk about scientific. Scientific is where you observe things. You observe them, you observe how they change, and you make conclusions. Philosophical is more internal. It's more about using your logic. So here's an example. I know without a shadow of a doubt that Andy here is not a married bachelor. How do I know he's not a married bachelor? That's contradictory. And I came to a conclusion like that by using philosophy. That's part of what philosophy is. Identifying contradictions like that, deductive reasoning like we'll talk about. So philosophy is basically coming to these truths or these conclusions using logic. Okay? All right. So the first thing we need to do when we talk about the philosophical evidence for the beginning of the universe, let's talk about infinity. Is infinity real? What is infinity, by the way? Can anyone define it for me? No end? What'd you say? Constant, okay. Anybody else? Infinity. Is it a really big number? Yeah. Infinity is not really a number, right? It just goes forever. But what does that mean? Well, there's two types of infinity, and I want to talk about them because they get confused, they get mixed up. There's a thing called an actual infinity and a potential infinity. Here's the difference. An actual infinity would say this. They would say, like, in this room, there is an actual infinite amount of things. Like, there literally is infinite amount of things. Now, I don't believe that. I believe an actual infinite is impossible because if you keep adding, there's always room to add one more. Infinity, by definition, is never reachable. It's infinite. We can reach finite numbers, but we can't reach an infinite amount of numbers or things. So an actual infinity would be that, which I don't believe is possible. But there's also this thing called a potential infinite. And this actually has to do with and if you think about it, it can have to do with our eternity in heaven. So an actual infinite is I'm walking and I'm going to keep walking for eternity. I'm going to keep walking forever. And I will never die. I'll just keep walking in the same direction. I'm moving towards a potential infinite, but I'm never actually getting there. Or like when we die and go to heaven, I believe at least, we are going to be living for eternity, but never reach a moment in time where we look back, go, oh, we made it to infinity, right? It's been an infinite amount of days since I died. That's not how it works. But we are going towards a potential infinite, meaning it'll just never stop, right? So there's the difference between an actual and a potential. And this is very important. People, I don't know if you've ever heard this. If you have two people, somebody here, right? And this person here takes up half the distance and walks towards them. And then that person takes up half the distance and walks towards me. And then I go half that distance and keep going on and on and on. Theoretically, our toes will never touch. And they'll say, see, you have an infinite amount of distances. No, that's actually just a potential infinite. We're just potentially going forward and never actually reaching each other. Okay? That's a theoretical thing. The point is an actual infinite doesn't exist. And here's an analogy that helps. It helps me. Is this domino analogy. So let's do a thought experiment. Let's say you're standing out on the road, like a long highway, this way and this way. And you look down and you see, oh, there's a line of dominoes. They're all set up real nice. And they're in a straight line. They're going all the way down the road this way. And then they're going all the way down the road this way. You can't see the end of them on this side or this side. Right? And you're looking down and you go, okay, that's really cool. And all of a sudden you hear a noise and you're like, oh, something's happening. And you realize from that direction, there's dominoes that are falling down. Oh, and then eventually they reach you. Here's the question. Could the line of dominoes in that direction be infinite? Why not? Right? And there's a couple answers here. They had to be pushed over. They had to start. But here's the one answer that I like. They would have never gotten to me then. I would have never been able to see them get to this point because they started an infinite amount of time ago or moments ago. So in the same way, when we talk about past events, I don't know, it doesn't matter whether they're a second long or a day long, and let's just say days. An infinite amount of days ago. If there was an infinite amount of days before today, guess what? Today would never have gotten here. The same thing with those dominoes. So there's a lot of examples to show how an actual infinite isn't possible. And the point here, again, is to show that the universe cannot have a past eternal amount of events. Okay, there has to be a point at which it started. Again, we went through the scientific evidence. Now we're going through the philosophical evidence. Yes? You hand her the mic.
Is it safe to say then that time does not exist in infinity? Like, it's timeless, right? You can't have something have a beginning and exist in time, because then those dominoes would eventually reach you if there was time in there. Is that what you're trying to say? There's not an actual infinity.
That relates because when we talk about time, we're talking about moments or events that happen and like in a series. So yeah, that's kind of the way it is. But yeah, basically what it is that there can't be an infinite amount of seconds or an infinite amount of time or an infinite amount of moments, right? Because that's what time is. A time is a lapse of events or moments. And there can't be an infinite amount of them, otherwise we would never get to today. Does that make sense? That we would never get to today. Okay. All right, where are we at here? So, if the universe were eternal, there'd be an infinite number of past events, but we just saw how that's impossible. An actual infinite number of things is impossible. Therefore, the universe cannot be eternal. Today would have never arrived. So what can we say? That's basically it for the philosophical evidence. We just talk about infinity. It's like, no, actual infinite can't exist. So we just showed beyond a reasonable doubt, I think with good solid evidence for anyone who's open and honest, that premise one is true, that whatever begins to exist has a cause, whether it's a chair or a drum set or the universe, doesn't matter. And we show that premise two, the universe began to exist. We show that to be true using two methods, one scientific and two with philosophy, that you cannot have an infinite past because that would require an infinite amount of events. So what does that show? Going back to our logical argument structure, if the premise one is true and premise two is true, the conclusion, if it follows, we have a sound argument here, don't we? So the universe has a cause. That follows. from the argument. Now, so we get to this point. We just said, okay, we just showed this guy or this gal, whoever, yeah, the universe has a cause. Big deal. What? The cause could be a robot, or the cause could be a leprechaun for all I know. Like, what is that? Who cares? Well, now this is where we start to unpack what the cause must be. So what does this tell us? We're going to be using something called deduction. What is that? Basically, we're saying, if this, then this has to be the case. So I'm trying to think of an example here. If Jesse was born, he has a mother. Like, that's just, we make deductions like that, like logical deductions, okay? Actually, there's a guy, I don't know why it's in here. I left it in for some reason, but there's a guy named Daniel Dennett, very hard atheist. And here's what I find with a lot of these atheist scientists. They're not very good philosophers, okay? I try to be disciplined in science and philosophy, but a lot of these scientists are very good scientifically minded wise, but philosophically they're not very good. So Daniel Dennett, famous atheist, believes that the universe caused itself. Really intelligent guy. But he believes the universe caused itself? It doesn't work, because in order to cause something, you have to exist first. Were going to say something? Yeah. How? And I'm glad you said it, because it actually pulls up another thing. It's not random, but when somebody makes a claim like that, it's not your job to show them they're wrong. It's their job to show them why they're right. And that's called the burden of proof. So in a conversation, and this we'll get into this more in tactics in that section, but when someone makes a claim like, well, I think the universe came from a leprechaun, I don't have to try to show why that's false. They need to try to show why they think that's true. So you don't need to sit there and don't, because that's not your job. But, however, that goes both ways. If you make a claim, it's your job to show why it's true, okay? So, the first thing we need to do here is this. We need to ask this question. What this cause could not have been. So, if the universe began to exist, and we define universe as all space, matter, and time, if that's how we're defining it, what this cause could not have been is space, matter, and time. Why? Anybody know why? Because they can't create themselves. They have to exist first, but then that defeats the whole point of the argument here. So if space didn't exist, then space can't be the cause of space. If time didn't exist, time can't be the cause, and matter can't be the cause. So, again, we're using logical, deductive reasoning here. Well, then the cause must have been spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. Okay? What does that mean? Well, spaceless, it basically means whatever it is, it's not bound by physical space. Whatever it is, it's not bound by physical space because there was no physical space. Okay? Timeless, meaning it's outside of time. Like, it has whatever it is or whatever it was not in a state of time like we know it. Okay? So I like to say it was outside of time. Immaterial, or you might say spiritual even, or you might say it's supernatural, right? Because natural is like nature, but supernatural is beyond nature. Immaterial, it has to be immaterial, or like I said, you could say spiritual. So here we got 3 attributes right here. All we did was use logic to come to this conclusion so far. But we can actually get 2 more easily out of this argument, 2 more attributes. And 2 of them are powerful and personal. This cause must be powerful. Can anybody tell me why this cause must be powerful? The beginner of the universe must be powerful because it's more obvious than you think. Because it created it. Because if I let's say I create a rock, and I say, hey, I just created this out of nothing, that'd be really impressive, right? But then you go, but he created all of the universe, or this thing that we're trying to get to, created all the universe and everything in it. That's a very powerful being. That's just a logical conclusion. And then lastly, and I believe this is the most important but it's also the most difficult maybe for someone to understand, is this being must be personal. And this is where you get a lot of objections like, no, I don't see how that follows. Like, why does it have to be a person and versus something else? Well, let's talk about it. This cause must be personal. When I say personal, what I mean is a person or a being with a mind. That's what I mean by personal, okay? So like a chair is not personal, right? Non-living things, right? Only persons or minds. Well, there's two things that fit. Let me go back. There's two things that actually fit these things. Okay, so there's two things that exist that actually fit these things. One is a what he would call a mind that doesn't have a body. So a mind in and of itself, not the brain, but the mind would fit this. A mind, like a mind would fit spaceless, timeless, immaterial, in the sense that it doesn't need to be connected to those things. But the other thing that fits it is what we call abstract objects. So what are abstract objects? We could get into this real deep, but we're not going to. Basically, an abstract object is something non-physical that exists outside of space and time, unlike concrete objects. So this would be a concrete object. This would be a concrete object. Numbers are considered abstract objects. Okay. So numbers are some examples. Concepts that we have in our mind, stuff like that, things that aren't physical. But let's just use numbers because that's the simplest one. Numbers are considered abstract object. They're timeless in the sense that they have no effect on time. Time has no effect on them. They're spaceless. They're immaterial. They're not material things. They're concepts. So a person, a personal being, and an abstract object both kind of fit those first three. But here's the problem. The problem with an abstract object is this. Remember, we said abstract objects are like numbers. Has the number 7 ever caused you to have $7, let's say? Has any number ever caused anything to happen? No, they're what they call causally effete. They're not able to produce, or they're not able to cause things. Go ahead.
I was using an object or sense to formulate.
Yeah, Andy said they have no intention, right, or will to do anything. They're just there. And some people would argue they're not even real. They're just imaginary. Either way, they're causally effete. They can't cause anything. The number 7 never put $7 in my bank account. Okay. So abstract objects cannot cause anything like the number 7. A personal being or a mind, which is non-physical, can make a choice, however. So if you have a state at which there's no time, no space, no matter, nothing, which again, there's a rocks dream about, you can't even comprehend that, then in order to go from that to a state of things or a state of existence, something had to have happened. And the only thing that makes logical sense is that a choice was made, right? It's not like the number 7 was floating out there and did something. We know that numbers can't do anything, but a choice had to be made. And what's the kind of thing can make choices? Personal beings, God, people, right? That's the only thing that makes logical sense. So that's why when we say that, we can go back that this cause must be personal as well. There's nothing else out there that can explain why anything exists other than that there was a choice to be made. All right, so when you run through this, and so let's say you're talking with somebody and you go, okay, so we've just reasoned through this. We've got a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful personal being, and we supported all that. What does that sound like? Sounds like God. This is, I wouldn't call this a knockdown argument, but I call it a pretty powerful argument, because when you get to this conclusion using science and philosophy, and once it starts making sense, you go, wow, that's really powerful. So for anybody struggling with the idea that there's no good reasons to believe in God, Here's one big one. We just went through it. Okay. And again, guys, I've been studying this stuff for like 15 years. It takes time to wrap your mind around it. But hopefully what I'm doing is getting you intrigued, planting seeds, and then maybe next time when you're in a conversation, you're like, oh shoot, I don't know how to answer that. Maybe now you'll be excited to go back and try to learn. Okay. And again, I'm always here for you too. But anyway, so we got a couple more things, and then we're gonna do a little quiz together, okay, to wrap this up. So this is exactly what we mean by God when we say that. Any questions? Kelly, you want to say something, right? Just kidding. Look terrified. I told her I'd tease her this week. Oh yeah, sorry. Oh, so right. So you're saying that they would think that, well, because I think what they would maybe say is that, well, that it would be hard for them to believe in creatio ex nihilo, like creation out of nothing. And well, there's got to be something to create from, right? Well, one, that's not, if they're Christian, that's not really biblical. And two, philosophically, you have to ask, well, where did that thing that God used come from? Like that had to have a cause if it's not eternal. So you come up to a problem there. I think the problem is if you have a hard time understanding how something can come from nothing, the only thing that could possibly make something come from nothing is being like God. And that brings us back to God again. So good. So then wrapping this up, we went through this faster than I thought. That's okay. Whatever begins to exist has a cause, and this is again reaffirmed through our experience, right? The universe began to exist, and this is shown to be true scientifically and philosophically. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Now, once we get to that point, we deduce what that cause must be like. Must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, and personal, and this is an accurate description of God. And this is just one argument in many arguments, and what we try to do in apologetics is to make a cumulative case. So we can use this argument and another argument and build a strong case, just like they would in a courtroom, okay? All right, we got 15 minutes left. First, any questions before I'm going to pass this out? And I don't have any pens for you guys, but if you can do it in your head too if you want. You guys want to pass these around? Here, we'll give you just 10 questions. We'll go through them together. Here, you take a bundle there. There's one question on the back of the paper too. Then pass those around. Actually, give me one. Thank you. Now you can use your notes, but try not to. Try not to, okay? Because I think it's good to try to remember this stuff. All right, let's wait till everybody has one. Yes. I'm going to take a picture of everybody here. Everybody got one? Cool. All right. First question now. Keep quiet. Don't shout out loud. I'll ask you guys to give an answer when I'm ready. So true or false, an argument in which the conclusion follows logically from the premises, but one of the premises or more is not true is called a sound argument. True or false, don't say it out loud. Either write it down or think of it in your head. I'll give you a minute. Okay. Is it true or false? Anybody? False. Very good. Do you guys know what the argument would be called? Would it be called invalid or valid? It would actually be valid because the conclusion follows from the premises. Okay, that's okay. It's not a sound argument for sure, though. All right. Without looking, if you can, number 2, don't say it out loud. What is the first premise of the cosmological argument? Anybody else? I don't know if you heard her. What's the first premise? Oh, sorry. Cindy, can you pause that? Sorry.
Does God exist?
All right, sorry. What were you saying, Andy? Oh, somebody else had it? What was it? That's okay. First premise, what is it? Awesome. You guys got that. All right. What is creatio ex nihilo? Creation from nothing. Right? You guys got that? What did Aristotle say what he thought nothing is like? What rocks dream about. Good definition, I think. All right. Why does the first premise of the cosmological argument not apply to God? Now, somebody who hasn't answered yet, please. Why does the first premise of the cosmological argument not apply to God? Keith, you got an answer? God didn't have a beginning, right? So he never began to exist, therefore it doesn't apply because the premise says whatever begins to exist, right? Okay. All right, you don't have to explain them, but can anybody without looking list the 5 scientific evidence we went over in the acronym SURGE? Without looking, anybody? Anybody know the first one? Not space. Second law of thermodynamics. That's the S. Remember we talked about the flashlight thing? How it runs out of energy just like the universe would? Anybody know what the U stands for? Very good, Victoria. Universe is expanding, discovered by Edwin Hubble. The R? Anybody know what the R stands for? George, you know it.
Radiation.
Radiation afterglow. And that's that microwave background or the heat remnant from the Big Bang. Can anybody describe to me the second law of thermodynamics? A little trickier, but can anybody describe it? Going from order to disorder. That's a good way of explaining it. Going from let's say heat to cold, or getting that equilibrium, right? So second law of thermodynamics, going back to the flashlight, any usable energy will eventually run out of energy. All right, what discovery was made by Edwin Hubble in 1929? What was it that he saw in his telescope? Redshift is called. Everybody know what that means again? Stars are moving away, right? Okay, which showed what? Let's expand. Good job. 2 more questions. Number 9, what is the difference between an actual infinite and a potential infinite? All right, let's go through this one more time. Just like it says, an actual infinite means there's an actually infinite number of things. A potential infinite is something moving towards an infinite but never reaching it. And we said an actual infinite isn't possible because by definition, infinite is never reachable because there's always another step you can take. What is a trillion plus a trillion plus a trillion times a trillion? You can go as big as you want. You'll never get to infinity, right? So an actual infinite is not not possible, but a potential infinite is possible. So what that points to, that's part of the philosophical evidence for the beginning of the universe. Meaning, like the domino thing we talked about, if each domino represented, let's say a day, just say a day. And if there's an infinite amount of days going into the past, today would have never gotten here. So to traverse an infinite number of steps or to traverse an infinite number of miles or inches, it doesn't matter, is not possible. Therefore, today could have never gotten here if the universe was an infinite amount of time ago. Because you can't cross that infinite gap. Is the point. See, some of this stuff is a lot to absorb, so I'm glad for the questions. Yes, Cindy? Oh. Unbelievers, believers. I mean, it's more of a philosophical question than a religious one, but it helps us in this argument. But no, I mean, a lot of famous people, a lot of big thinkers out there believe in an actual infinite. We argue that it's not possible. And if anybody comes across an argument, that supports it, let me know, because I haven't heard one. All right, last question in the back here. What are the 5 attributes that we deduced from the conclusion of the cosmological argument? Okay, you can go. Outside of space, outside of time, outside of matter, powerful and personal. Very good. The cause must be outside of space, outside of time, outside of matter, personal and powerful. Okay, so we got a few minutes left here, guys. Take home these notes. Again, what I said in my sermon this last weekend, we got an hour and a half here today, which is great, but I threw a lot at you. And we're going to kind of, next week, we're not going to go through this whole thing again, but we're going to talk about some objections that we can kind of know about, and we'll move on. But yeah, I would look at these things, and there are videos I could share with you. But really, the point of this is to get as much out of it as you can, so that if you're in a conversation and somebody, let's say somebody genuinely wants to believe, but they just don't have enough reason, you could say, well, I can help you with that. I know a couple things that might help, right? So it can be very useful. All right. Any questions? No? Okay. Well, you guys did a good job. There are a few people here that couldn't make it tonight, probably because of the weather, but it's all being recorded. Hopefully that works. Sorry for some of the malfunctions here, but if you guys don't have any questions, we can pray and then head out. All right. I'll say a prayer. Lord, we just thank you so much for this evening. I just pray right now that everybody here can just go home, not feel overwhelmed, but just kind of absorb this slowly. And I pray that we can learn these things as best as possible and know how to use them and when to use them, Lord. And I just thank you for everybody here. I love seeing people's hearts to want to grow. And even if it takes time out of their day, it shows what they really care about, Lord. So I appreciate them. And I pray for them, pray for a safe trip home. Lord, we thank you for this night. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks, you guys.